Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us in the Peregrine's Spring Webinar Series. And today we are here to talk about using the online comprehensive assessment tool, but more importantly, using the reports from the assessment for your assurance of learning work, for your continuous improvement and closing the loop efforts. The title of the presentation is Understanding Knowledge Gaps in Business Education. And as I mentioned, if you have any questions, please raise your hand. We'll be happy to answer your questions. And also, I will leave 15 minutes for the Q&A session. So assurance of learning, right? We're all breathing it, living it, and it's very important to have data and information on what our students learning, what knowledge levels they are retaining using various assessment tools, right? And we can compare our results against varied aggregate pools. But what is not as well understood is now, why are the students missing particular questions? And once we understand why students are answering questions incorrectly, we will be able to get to the root cause of the problem and come up with potential knowledge gaps. And you do that using reports that we at Peregrine have created for you, which are quite unique, and we are the only provider who has such reports. And along the presentation, we will also cover what the assessment tool is, what are the features and capabilities, and then delve into what kinds of reports we provide for you. And from those reports, what information do you use and how you use the results, and then especially with the response distractors, how you can improve the quality of your not only curriculum content, but also the delivery of the content to your students. Most of you are familiar with us. We're Peregrine Global with two sister organizations, Peregrine Leadership and Peregrine Academic Services. And the two organizations, we share the same motto: to make a difference in the world. And we staunchly believe in excellence in higher education, and we promote it. And we do that by partnering with the colleges and universities and higher educational organizations. But with the colleges, our goal is to help you to measurably improve the quality of your academic programs, right? And then at the center of education is students. And again, our goal is to help the students to gain the skills they need to succeed in their academic as well as their future professional careers. So here's the list of services that we provide here at Peregrine Academics. At the center of it is our assessment, the online comprehensive customizable assessment tool to map to your academic program and your learning outcomes. And we offer the assessment services for a number of academic disciplines as listed here. On the educational program sides, we offer academic leveling courses for undergraduate transfer or incoming business administration students without prior business course instruction, or their course instruction was 5, 10, or 15 years old. The B-School Connection, the Bloomberg Business Week Partnership Online Education Resource Center, is an exciting tool that enriches curriculum content. It provides faculty with the freshest, the latest business news analysis, activities, quiz questions, and so forth. Feel free to check it out on our website. The e-programs, Exploring Your Potential Career Readiness courses, online leadership courses, and last but not least, the Write Insight and Academic Writing Readiness course that you can customize to embed the APA, the MLA, or the CSM documentation styles. We're very excited to share with you that we have achieved our 1 millionth online service registration, but that happened back in August. So we are probably due with another exciting update very soon. And we serve more than 460 and client institutions in 35 countries around the world. So coming back to the programmatic assessment, our goal here is to understand the knowledge gaps in higher education using Peregrine's reports attached to our online assessment tool. So we have developed a normed summative assessment tool for business administration academic programs and related to business administration programs. And this assessment tool is used for internal and external programmatic evaluation. Our assessment is customizable and it could easily be integrated into any business program. And we're here to measure students' retained knowledge. So there's no need for students to study or no need for faculty to teach to a content for students to take the Peregrine assessment. So the key to customization is for you to be able to create an assessment that maps to your academic curriculum content, but more importantly, maps to your programmatic learning outcomes. And we have designed it, of course, specifically for programmatic accreditation requirements. And we're talking about, of course, learning outcomes assessment, assurance of learning, and for ACBSB to provide you with the external academic benchmarking. So, for those of you who are using it, we have 12 core business topics offered to you with additional specialization and concentration topics in a number of areas that'll come up soon. We can integrate the assessment tool into your learning management system, and that way students will not leave their Blackboard or Moodle or Canvas environment, and they will experience the assessment in a very easy, seamless way. But more importantly for your faculty, using the LTI integration to your learning management system, the grades are automatically posted to your gradebook. So that's a really great feature that a lot of faculty enjoy. And if you are with the school that's using our assessment and not using the LMS integration yet, feel free to email your client services manager and request this feature added to your service. We do have 3 different separate test banks for undergraduate programs, master's level programs, and doctoral level programs. Now, client admin is available to you, so you get access as an administrator to client admin, available to you 24/7 access, and you will be able to access not only your individual student registration information, but also live results and data. And through the client admin side, you generate the reports, many of the reports that we are so well known for. Because we have, the 460 plus colleges and universities using our assessment and other educational services, we are really in a great position to provide you with a multitude of aggregate pools for your external comparison. So we do provide a secure platform, and our exam does not need to be proctored because we have built in a number of safety and security features, among which is randomized question offering to deliver the assessment to your students in a place, space, and time of their choosing, essentially. So our goal has been to provide you with the cost-effective and a practical solution for evaluating your business-related programmatic learning outcomes. For you, specifically ACBSB schools, we're here to provide you the external aggregate pools of comparison to your programmatic results. And in one report, for example, external comparison report, you can select up to 5 aggregate pools within the same report to compare your students' results against these pools of comparison. Of course, we offer you a program level pre and post test structure, and we call it inbound and outbound testing. So the difference between the inbound and outbound exam results, that's your internal comparison of the program. So that's the direct measure of your student learning and also the value added of your program to the student's knowledge base. And as I mentioned, we measure students' retained knowledge directly. And for ACBSB specifically, not only we address the accreditation requirements, standard 4, but ACBSB has approved our tool for measuring student learning outcomes and performance. So these are the 12 core business topics offered on our business assessment exam. And depending on your program, most often the undergraduate programs would cover around 10 to 12 of these topics. Sometimes leadership is not covered at the undergraduate level. At your master's level, again, depending on your program coverage, you're going to have anywhere from 6 to 8 of these areas covered in a master's program. If you're interested to learn about the test bank validity and reliability, we have a quality assurance department that churns out these reports, and I'll be happy to share it with you if you are interested. So now coming back to the results, the analysis of the results, right? We do want to know where are the gaps in our students' knowledge. And in order to get to the reports, you will use the client admin site. So when you are a Peregrine client, you will get access to the client admin. There's no upper limit as to how many people can access your students' results and data. You tell us who should have access to your data. We take the safety and security and privacy of your data very seriously. So unless you let us know who should have access, unless you have specifically given us permission, we don't share school information with anyone else, or don't let anyone else have access to your data. We also have different rights, different levels of access. So if you want your dean just to have a read-only access, we can set it up as such. And if you have an instructor who's teaching, for example, a capstone course, a particular session of a capstone course, then we can have that instructor grant access to his or her students only. So through the client admin, you can track student progress. And as I mentioned, you can generate the individual and the summative reports through the client admin. And it's very easy to navigate. As you can see from the drop-down menu, you get the names of different reports, but we don't expect you to remember and memorize all the different reports. So we have a little sort of cheat sheet for you to remind you what each of these reports contain. So we do have reports based, so I'll kind of group them into three different categories. And one is based on individual student results. The other one is for your programmatic evaluation purposes. And the third one we call the supplemental reports. And I will update it with the slide that I have that groups them into three different groups. But the first report is, so let's see, we can go through so here's the list of our reports. And we're going straight to response distractors. Okay, so I'll give you a little synopsis of what each report is. The individual student data report, that's just Excel file containing your student by student results for each of the topic and subject areas. And we are providing you with the percent of questions answered correctly in this report. So this you can download, you can export, link it to your other databases if you need to do further analysis. But for your programmatic evaluation purposes, we strive to create all the reports that you need to use for your evaluation of the academic programs and continuous improvement efforts. So the first is the internal analysis. So if you are using our inbound and outbound assessment exams, you get the comparison of the results based on these two assessments, and that's your internal analysis. There's an executive summary version. If you want to take a look at your external comparison and benchmarking, you are going to use the external comparison report. So we are comparing your outbound exam results, if that's what you have, against one or more, in this case, up to 5 aggregate polls. And if you've used inbound and outbound, then we are comparing the percent change to those of the aggregate polls. There's also an executive summary version of it with the highlights of the external comparison report. And program comparison, number 6, and student cohort group comparison report, that's also something really good for a program that has multiple concentrations, specializations. And the student cohort group is you define your student cohort group. So a lot of the times you might have multiple campuses, you might have different types of students, transfer students or students who started with you from freshman year, adult learners, and so forth. So here we compare results of different groups. The idea is, for example, if you have accounting MBA students and you have marketing MBA students, are your accounting students performing at a higher level on accounting topics than your marketing students? You hope they do, right? But this report will tell you if the evidence supports that hope. As you know, with ACBSP, they ask you to provide 3 data points in your self-study report. And of course, in your following quality assurance reports, you need to provide your longitudinal results, right? So that's what this report is. And you can have results of up to 5 exam periods displayed in one report. Again, it's very flexible, it's customizable. You can look at annual data over 5 years, you can look at quarterly data, you can have, if you have multiple sessions. So you define the exam period, and then this is your trend analysis, right? And it's really good with closing the loop. If you have used our assessment data, and with the outbound exam results, you have a good sample and you have established the trend and you have used our other reports to identify where are the areas of your, say, weakness, and you have developed an action plan to implement change. And in the next testing period, you are going to see, did the change you implement have an intended impact? So longitudinal analysis report is really excellent for tracking data of impact or change impact to close the loop. Pairwise report is just shows student by student results. So if you have a student who has taken the inbound, midpoint, and outbound, we have data for that student, so that goes into the pairwise report. Grade scale report, student survey report. A survey is a complementary service we offer. And with Peregrine, you get a direct measure of student learning, right? You get comparative measure of student learning. And you get, and you can also, and this is the third party, of course, external party assessor of student learning. But using the student survey, you can get an indirect measure of student learning. So that's also another great tool. Or you can have your exit survey questions just uploaded and offered as part of the assessment exam. And the beauty of it is, you get 100% response back, right? So now coming back to the report at question of today's presentation, which is the Response Distractor Report. So this is a very unique report, as I mentioned, and we'll look at why students are answering questions incorrectly using the 5 types of response distractors. So before I go into the response distractors, I want to see if anyone has questions so far. Okay. As I mentioned, feel free to type your questions into the chat box. And I have Kathy on standby to answer your questions as well. All right, so as I mentioned, for the program coordinators, the course managers, we want to provide them with information as to why their students are answering questions incorrectly. So, so far, the reports before the response distractor report have looked at percent of questions answered correctly, right? And we're comparing it, against each other or for the internal evaluation or external benchmarking. And but then we kind of get stuck there, right? But then we have the other side of the coin, and when students are completing the exam, they are answering questions incorrectly. So we want to assume that they're not randomly incorrectly answering questions. So what we did is we actually took our test bank and coded all the incorrect answers to one of the 5 response distractors. And they are, so first of them is the fact-based error. So the question is, are your students answering questions incorrectly due to a fact-based error, or concept-based error, conclusion-based error, interpretation, we also call it perception-based error, or calculation-based error. So these are the 5 response distractors. So we have a multiple choice test bank. And so each question would have, 4 to 5 responses. And one of the responses is, of course, correct, and the others are incorrect. So when the responses are incorrect, we have coded them to one of these 5 response distractors. So a question, not every question would have 3 or 4 different response distractors. Some may have 1 or 2, 2 or 3, and some might just have all the same response distractors. So it really depends on the question. And the key is consistency, right? And as academicians or as faculty members or someone who has had faculty experience, we all know that it could be quite subjective. But as long as we're consistent in our approach, we can now look at the analysis of the results. So we have 3 sets of tables in the response distractor report. And the first, so this is the title page of the response distractor report with the general information of the assessment. And the first set of tables looks at your sample data. And with all of our reports are quite detailed. So we break them out by topics, which are made up of subtopics and subject areas. So we would have 6 to 12 topics in an assessment exam, depending on your program, and then each topic would have anywhere from 4 to 10 subject areas. And each student on average, they answer 10 questions per topic, and the questions are randomly offered to the student from the test bank of 3,000 plus questions in this example. And as I mentioned, we have the unique test banks for bachelor's, master's, and doctoral academic degrees. So let's take a look. So this is the first set of tables, which is your students' results. So we have the number of questions offered, percent of questions answered correctly, the number of questions and the percent. And then I will look at the 5 response distractors. So let's see if the next table. So this next set of tables compares your students' results against the test bank. So the question is, are your students answering questions at a higher percentage rate due to one of the response distractors as compared to the test bank? And when we see a statistically significant difference, we actually highlight it for you, so you don't have to go through the entire table, each row and cell. So for accounting, for example, on the credits and debits equity, on the equity, sorry, your students have answered questions at a higher percentage rate due to interpretation-based error than the occurrence in the test bank. And that's statistically significant difference. And so if it's an interpretation-based error, so 3 of these response distractors are more related to critical thinking, analytical thinking, right? The concept-based error, conclusion-based error, interpretation-based error. So that's an example of how you can get at, so indirectly to students' critical thinking in these business, topical, and subject areas. The third set of tables looks at your school's results and compares it to the aggregate pool of your selection. And again, when there's a statistically significant difference, we have highlighted it. And in this case, so how do you use the results? So let's get to that. Let's see if you have any questions. Okay. So the idea here is So assume that your students were making a higher than the test bank, higher than your aggregate pool of comparison, percent of questions answered incorrectly due to calculation-based error. So again, after establishing, you have a good sample, you have the trend that's established, and then after having reviewed the internal analysis report, the external analysis, looked at your curriculum, and then so you arrive at a conclusion that, well, your students need some assistance with math for accounting students. So maybe you can add a course, or you can add a few math review sessions within the course to improve the students' calculation skills. So that's kind of simple one, right? So, but here, for example, your students answering questions incorrectly at a higher percentage due to concept-based error than the aggregate pool. So that's for assets and liabilities, and we know this is statistically significant difference. And then, so what do you do? So one of the ways is you look at your curriculum, right, and see, do you have enough coverage of these topical areas in your content? So assume, yes, you have, good, contact hours, credit hours, that what should be covered. And then the next question should be, well, then how about you reinforce the understanding of these concepts? So how about if you add an activity or a group activity where you discuss, and there's more, deeper diving into the assets and liabilities, for example, in this example. So here, you're not only looking at the content of your curriculum, but also looking at the next level, how well you're delivering this content to your students, so it actually becomes a retained knowledge. And what can you do to aid in that process? So this helps you with improving the delivery of the content to your students. So that's your response distractor report in a nutshell. Any questions so far? So I already talked about this. So we're talking about comparing the results, your school's sample results, to the aggregate pool of comparison and the test bank. So that's the two sets. So this is, another one that shows the interpretation-based error results, for example, for this particular sample. So you can read this, yeah. Then the representation in the test bank. So, your students, for example, made a disproportionately higher than the test bank occurrence percent of questions answered incorrectly due to interpretation-based error, right? And then here's another example of the different distributions of the incorrect answers. And in this example of a business graduate population, they are choosing incorrect responses at a disproportionately higher rate for 13 out of 92 subjects. So you get this good information, and you can do even further analysis with your team. And you can run the reports on different samples, as I mentioned, right? On different testing periods and different samples. And you can look at the results for a particular topic and subjects, and then really compare it to the distribution in the test bank and the distribution in the aggregate pool of your choosing. And then it's always good to look at, why you see what you see, right? And then identify the causes, or identify the ways to improve what you see. Again, based on a good sample data, good on the established trend. And then you make any corrections. So once you make a correction with the next testing sample or cohort of students, you will be able to see the changes that you've made, the corrections you've taken. Did they have the intended impact? And then do the review and analysis again, and close the loop and put the story, the narrative of your activities in your quality assurance report or in your self-study. And that puts a really great closing the loop work for your accreditors' needs and also for your needs as well. So just kind of to go over the key takeaways is that the Response Distractor Report, it helps you to identify the potential knowledge gaps of your students when they are selecting incorrect answers at a disproportionately higher rate than the occurrence in the test bank and the aggregate pool. So as I mentioned, the interpretation-based errors, they relate to critical thinking, the application of the knowledge. And as we know, this is a challenge where schools are faced with not only measuring, but also how to improve it, right? So this is really helpful, hopefully for you to get another piece of information in this form. And we do notice that generally students do a good job at understanding the concepts and conclusions and fact-based sort of information. But the calculation-based errors are sort of easier to correct. But in order to address the more critical thinking-based errors, the concept conclusion-based errors, you really look at the entirety of your curriculum and at the ways how you're delivering that to your students. So with that, this comes the end of my presentation. So when you sign up for any of our services, you get a superior service from our client services management team. And these are the ladies of the client services management team. If you are an existing client and you want any more training, or if you want to get assistance with running the reports for the first time, or need a training how to run, because ultimately it's best if you can run them whenever you need them. You need to run them, then the client services manager is always happy to set up one-on-one meetings with you to provide that kind of training. So this is how you can reach us, and info at Peregrine Academics, or my email is alimaa@Peregrine Academics, and we'd be more than happy to set up one-on-one meetings or meetings for your team or faculty, or also answer any questions that you might have. So with that, I'd like to thank you and open the floor for your questions.